Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Thursday evening's members broadcast. I am Chloe Tetro. I am the health coach here with Ready Care. And for this evening, it's a beautiful evening, I will be having a little bit of a deep dive into a topic that a few people have brought up over the last number of weeks. It comes up quite regularly, and that is forming habits, how habits are formed, a little bit of a deep dive into what that actually means from a brain perspective and what that could mean when implementing lifestyle and behavioral choices. So there's a good bit of material to cover for the evening. So what I'll do is just jump right in there. Righto. So what are habits and what's actually involved in that? So when we begin our life, we all begin with there's what's called kind of tabula rasa theory, which would be we all begin with a blank slate. So there are certain genetic factors that would dictate some aspects of our behavior, but overall we kind of all start with more or less zero. We start to filter experiences when we're very young through what's called the reward system. So that's our capacity to assign meaning to some situations and the emotional impact that these have on us. There's 2 million synapses a second in an infant's brain, and they take in all the information and they begin to learn that some things are worth knowing, others aren't really as important. As we grow, many of our neural connections are lost. So things that may not potentially, affect us get left by the wayside, and things like things with personal meaning, or our mother's face is squinching up being something that we should recall. These things are solidified, and the ones that we use most frequently become stronger and easier to access. So in our foundational years, relationships would be kind of the first way that we begin to grow habit templates. We can take on the habits and information that is passed on by our primary caregivers, and we can inherit subconsciously a few beliefs about ourselves and others from those people. So these beliefs influence our repeated actions and our behaviors, and will start to inform what will be our lifelong habits. So because the brain captures such a huge amount of information, it works with your emotional center to simplify information down to what might be most meaningful to you, as I said a while ago. So events that activate the limbic system and the fear system and the amygdala, which if you've listened to anything that I've chatted about in the last number of weeks, I tend to come back to the amygdala quite a bit. They develop into avoidant behaviors. So the fear center and the amygdala get activated when we're a little bit fearful of something, if we feel under threat. And they can have the behavioral effect of setting off what's known as self-soothing habits or self-soothing behaviors. So very common ones would be nail biting, which I don't know if you can see that, but I mea culpa. Smoking, comfort eating, lots of different things would be self-soothing behaviors. And events that activate joyful sensations then will stimulate dopamine production and form positive habits, like going for walks on a nice day, or people that repetitively play sports or piano, these kind of things, instruments, things that we weave into our everyday that bring us specific joyful reward systems. So automatic habits, like brushing your teeth, are formed through prolonged repetition and are tied to specific meanings. So, for example, brushing your teeth in the morning might signal the start of your day, activity, energy, while the exact same action in the evening will be tied to unwinding, relaxation, bedtime. So habits can have a kind of associative, there can be quite a strong association pathway with them. So even though it's the same thing at different times of day might mean different things. So behavioral cues like that can prime our system for specific patterns of experiences, just as a particular experience can prime our system for behavior. So we see that thing with the teeth brushing. That's thanks to the brain's power of association. So specific visual cues, time, place, emotion, behaviors, thoughts even can form together and can create what's known as neural pathways. So these can present as problematic in unconscious habits, or they can be harnessed to consciously instruct your brain to support you. So why do we have a resistance to change, and what is the term neuroplasticity? So we know that the brain can change, but what is the resistance to it? So the evolutionary advantage to the automatic thought patterns could be that we don't have to think as much during certain activities. For example, if we're walking the same road every single day, we're kind of go into automatic mode, autopilot mode. Tying our shoes, we don't have to, at the beginning, it's what is it, around the bunny's ears and back again, or whatever it might be. There's an amount of effort required with it, but as we go on through life, we start to they're like little shortcuts in the brain, so we don't always have to do that. We have positive automatic habits, and we have more negative automatic habits, things that run a little bit below the surface that we're not fully aware of. So with the brain in its physical form, the brain creates those pathways through synapses. And a synaptic connection, so that's when two neurons fire together and connect in between, that can become gradually stronger through repetitive use, strengthening and reinforcing the bonds. In some cases, it is physically reinforced with a protein known as myelin. So there's an actual physical connection that reinforces all those pathways. So over time, what we repeatedly think about becomes easier and easier to access, because zoom, it's just going down the same pathway. Your brain knows the automatic habit. It's faster, it's easier to go there, it's reinforced. There's a Canadian neuropsychologist, Donald Hebb. He pioneered some work on neural networks in the mid 20th century, and he came up with the phrase that's known as is it Hebb? I think it's Hebb's law, which is neurons that fire together, wire together, which is a really simple way of thinking of those things. So basically, the things we think about the most often, or the things we reinforce most often, are things that become, Napoleon Hill has a quote: habits are first cobwebs, then cables. So something quite flimsy, reinforced over time, over and over, becomes extremely solidified in the brain. So changes in the synapses are what's known as synaptic neuroplasticity. So that is the good news with the brain, is that it continuously changes itself in response to our instructions. What we choose to reinforce will stay reinforced. What we choose to change is possible through neuroplasticity. The key is to be aware of the patterns and the habits that we have, and that we are fortifying, and to give an alternative to the brain that's attractive enough to break out of that solidified, easy energy pathway and onto something different. So that kind of leads me on to, you might have heard people talk about your why. When you create a new habit, it's really important to know why you want to do it. And aside from, general clarity that's associated with understanding the motivations for wanting to do something, in the brain, it's a lot more. There's a lot more at play with understanding that. So when you are creating a new habit, it's important to understand what the intrinsic motivation for the desired change is. And I'll go into intrinsic and extrinsic a little bit more in a talk down the line, but I'll just kind of give a brief overview for this evening. Extrinsic motivation is when there's an external driver for change, and that is usually experienced when there's an external demand placed on us to adjust, made on us from people outside of ourselves or forces outside of ourselves. So a very common one that we can come across is in our own lives or with ourselves is, my partner said I should get out and exercise more. So, not apart from being an extremely rude thing to say, With that, it's something outside of ourselves. It's quite helpful as an initial catalyst, maybe sometimes to shake us out of our comfort zone, but it's not really strong enough to give us true drive for motivation as individuals. An overdependence on this type of motivation might bring up feelings of needing to do something rather than wanting to, or being forced into something you don't particularly want to do, or feeling that you should or you ought to, and the kind of guilt and shame that comes with not particularly meeting that degree of standard that's laid out by another person for you. So that's the kind of internal landscape that evokes is, for me anyway, I don't know about you, would be something quite uh, with a lot of pressure, something that already there's a level of bucking against. And that's a very common cause of cognitive dissonance. So, what that is, it's experienced as part of you wanting to do something while the other part resists. Um, Things like my doctor said I should lower my blood sugar levels, or those kind of things, lower my blood pressure. It's very important to understand when you are doing like a behavioral change, because at the end of the day, you're the person driving the change. You're living the day in, day out of something. It's very important to have what's known as then an intrinsic motivation. Your whole system has to be on board when you are looking to do some behavioral and habit changes. Intrinsic motivation then would be different in that it's very individualized, person by person, and it's something that will really personally drive you to want to do something different. It should align with your personal values, whatever those might be. And those are very different, again, person to person. It can be autonomy, freedom, it can be family, it can be quality time, it can be lots of different things. So they're usually the things that are most important to you in your own life. If you can tie a goal to something like that, you are absolutely laughing, because what it's going to do is it's going to now become something that's rewarding to pursue instead of something that your system is bucking up against. So with that, it's important that your goal is also tied to what's known as a positive emotional attractor. So those are goals that envision positive emotions that you want to experience, and they stay away from negative attractor ones, which would be goals that are focused on wanting to avoid something. I think I've given the analogy a few times in these kind of chats about your brain doesn't really differentiate between a negative association and a positive association. So if you tell your brain not to do something, it doesn't really understand that. If I said, don't think of a pink elephant, you can't really unpick that as don't. You'll just think of it as the pink elephant. And where that can be confusing for goals is tying a goal to avoiding a negative emotion is actually quite likely to pique that amygdala, that threat response, and those self-soothing behaviors that can come along with it. So goals with negative attractor emotions can spike the threat response, and it will sometimes associate the new task with a negative emotion that's most likely to cause a withdrawal from it or a booking from it. An example could be, I don't want to feel lazy and sluggish. I don't want to feel unhappy with my health. Right? That's a fair goal that somebody might place, but already the language they're associated is quite negative language. It's language that would bring up imagery of and emotional associations with it that could be tied to quite heavy emotional associations, like feeling guilty and feeling ashamed, and already in the brain's pathway you're weaving in associations with this goal with things that it kind of goes, ugh, I don't want to go near that. So sometimes a better well, actually, not sometimes, definitely. A better avenue to take with that is to tie your goal in the beginning stages to the reward that you're going to feel. So there it could be, I want to feel the healthiest I've ever felt. I want to feel in charge and empowered by my own health choices. I want to feel proud of myself for my health choices. So already there's language there that's a lot more dopamine reflective. It's things that could be tied to your personal values, and that will there's that kind of language of, this is something I want to move towards. And these are the kind of things that you're working with when you're working with the brain. One stimulates our internal threat system, the other a reward system. So from the get-go, there is an interwoven simplicity or an interwoven challenge. In the absence of meaningful reward to activate the dopamine pathways into action, the brain prefers to do what it always has. So it might equate an unattractive change with losing the comfort of what it already knows. So identifying your intrinsic motivation helps you to anchor your associative neural pathways to reward, and this bypasses the brain's loss aversion. So honestly, the brain is like, we don't know that. If there's no reward, we're fine. We already know this. Let's just continue to do this. There was a 2015 study published in the Psychology Journal, which looked at the differences between using positive emotional attractors and negative emotional attractors, and what that impact would have on leadership. So the outcome of that was that the findings was that the use of positive attractor emotions would stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It diminishes stress and anxiety, shows greater perceptual openness and greater levels of openness to new behavioral changes. So the adaptability that's needed for new habits, or the flexibility of thinking, or that breaking out of a rigid threat response type of thinking, is exactly what one needs when they're undertaking new habit changes. Try to find something that aligns with your values and really focus on, what will you gain out of this? What's the yummy thing now that your brain can latch onto? So there is there's with the automatic thoughts, it's kind of an inbuilt system because the brain uses so much energy. I think at rest, it uses 20% of the body's energy supply, which is massive. So what it does is it creates all these little shortcuts, and a lot of our thinking, I think up to 90% actually, a lot of our thinking can become our default thinking system. So automatic thoughts. 95%, sorry, I have my notes here in front of me. 95% of the brain's activity, yeah, is habit-driven behaviors. So a way to engage our prefrontal cortex, which is outside of our automatic thoughts, is to place the question in a time scale. So it kind of bumps you out of automatic thought, brings the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is basically, like, it gets the nickname CEO of the brain. It's what is involved in kind of rational long-term thinking. And when you're making new habits, it's really the type of thinking that you want to be engaging. So one of the easiest ways to activate your prefrontal cortex is to use time-based questions. So does this action help your goals a year from now? A year from now, if you followed through on this action, what could that look like? And bringing in the kind of imaginative quality will activate that part of the brain which gets you out of the automatic thought and into your kind of adult brain or CEO brain. What will be true for you after completing your goal that isn't true for you now? When you've made your changes, what will be different? So really kind of using imaginative, time-based scenarios is a great way to do it. And you can do it in the inverse as well. If it's a freezing day or it's a rainy day and you don't feel like getting up to go for a run, I don't blame you. But in saying that, put that in a time-based scenario and say, okay, if you did this every time it rained, in Ireland a year from now, what will be different? And that really engages that side of it and can help to break us out of the automatic thought system. So the other way to help to build dopamine, and the more dopamine you put towards a habit, the stronger that's going to be, because it's throwing all its energy into this new pathway that it's creating. So it's tracking. So tracking is, especially on the program, it's a lot. There are specific markers that you might choose to track, whether that be blood sugar levels, whether that be weight, whether that be the amount of days that you are eating on track, whether it is your ability to, like, if you time yourself 10 minutes, how far can you walk? Those kind of things. So anything that involves a degree of tracking is going to help with the dopamine loop. So the more that you break a goal up into smaller goals that you can hit little what you call the markers throughout, it's going to help you to stay focused and motivated. It'll simplify your goal from being this broad abstract ambition into smaller achievable steps that consistently move you through your threshold of challenge. And challenge is embedded in change, and it's a natural, enjoyable part of the process. At least it should be. So skillfully applying incremental challenges based on your progress to date will lead you towards a momentum of strategic direction towards your desired goal. And it's going to help you to break something down from this large thing into smaller tracking, will help it to not be as overwhelming. It's day by day, it's week by week, and it's going to really help to keep you focused on that. Tracking progress will help you to achieve smaller steps towards larger goal and will reinforce that positive feedback loop. The brain's reward system then is intrinsically linked with developing motivation, which, it's an absolute win-win. Dopamine neurons, they don't just make us feel good, but they activate learning behaviors that motivate us to repeat an action. So the other kind of behavioral side of it is, if you're looking to create a new habit, is to stack it with something you already do, which I would kind of suggest to some clients, especially some that are looking, sorry, sun's in my eyes here, I'm not exactly complaining, it's like Costa del Cork, that if you're starting off and, for example, you might not have tracked blood sugar levels, being consistent with the time of day that you do something and stacking it on top of something else is always going to be easier than if you're just wavering around. So if there's something that you do every single day at the same time or near enough the same time, so whether that's brushing your teeth, having a shower, coming in and making dinner, if you can stack a habit on top of something that's pre-existing, it's going to be a lot smoother to transition into that new habit than it would be by just throwing a dart at the wall, throwing spaghetti at the wall. You're anchoring it into something that's already built into your day. A good one is when people weigh. So some people choose to weigh every day, or they choose to weigh once a week, or whatever it might be. It's as soon as they get out of the shower in the morning, or as soon as they're done brushing their teeth in the morning, and then they'll just jot it down on their phone or their notepad or whatever it might be, and it begins to really tie itself into their everyday. Another one is what's called implementation intention. So that's one of the most effective methods of introducing a new habit and proactively challenging any maladaptive habits that you might have. So what that entails is, the basic would be, if this, then that. And some of you might be familiar with that through workplaces. What you would tend to do is state the new behavior, followed by a specific time and place that this will happen. So if you are consciously harnessing the intention, you can work with your brain to turn your environment into a behavioral cue, the same way that we would have said at the beginning how brushing your teeth in certain instances, I'm talking about brushing your teeth a lot on this one, will trigger specific associative responses. So for example, if your intention is to get more exercise, an example of a helpful statement could be, I'll get off one stop earlier to introduce more walking each time I get the bus. So you have your behavior and you have a very distinct time and place. A particularly helpful question when you're looking to maximize the impact of this is, overall, what are you going to do to get in your own way? And this is something that is a really good challenge to ask yourself at the beginning stages. And this is something that I'd kind of chat to in early sessions with people is what potential, I'd probably phrase it differently. It's what potential challenges can you see coming up? And this kind of helps us to look at past behaviors of how we may have approached something and look at specific behaviors that we have that could potentially get in the way of what we're looking to do. So already you're bringing some awareness around specific behaviors that you know yourself. Oh yeah, you know, I'll give an example of, if it's a weekday and I come in and I'm exhausted from the day, most of the time I would find it more difficult to cook a meal. So I'm more likely to go for a quick fix. So brilliant. Already there, you've loads of information about the necessity for preparation, and you've kind of outlined that in the very, very beginning stages of the habit change. So it's a really helpful question to ask yourself when you undertake any new task, is what am I going to do to get in my own way? And I love answering this myself, because most of the time we tend to be very good at pointing out our flaws, but sometimes that can really work in our favors if we're coming at it from a purely kind of curiosity place of wanting to do the best that we can at the beginning stages. You can do this as well if you encounter challenging scenarios. So I know, especially over summer, a lot of you have said, look, there's a wedding coming up, or I'm going on holidays for X amount of days, and I know that this particular scenario could be challenging. So, for example, if you've found social gatherings to be difficult environments for willpower before, around unhealthy food, for example, an example of the likes of an implementation intention could be, if I'm invited to a social gathering, I'll make sure to have eaten prior to leaving the house, or I'll have make sure to bring something with me prior to leaving the house. If there's an identified challenge, like negative self-talk and guilt around slip-ups, especially, an example could be, if I slip up, then I'll remind myself of why I wanted to start the program in the first place. And that's kind of anchoring back into that why and what's important in the intrinsic motivator. So with slip-ups, and I think I was only chatting about this in the morning sessions a few weeks ago. So for those that heard it, it's there's a lot of anything that keeps us away from cortisol threat response is going to be helpful. So if a slip up does happen, which they do, and that's totally okay, we're human beings, to not beat ourselves up, not utilize negative self-talk, because the more peaked that threat response is, as we were saying in the beginning, the more likely it is to want to self-soothe. And sometimes self-soothing can take the guise of specific behaviors that are not particularly helpful, whether that be food-based, self-based, or whatever it might be. So, sorry, kind of going on time there, apologies. To bring it together, our habits are formed most of the time in the beginning stages of our life fairly subconsciously, and we can inherit them from our primary caregivers, and some of them we develop as a response to our emotional needs. Habits are created through repetition and learning over time. That's really, really crucial when looking at habits, because it can be, inverted commas, negative thing if it's subconscious and it's happening day in, day out, and it's leading us to a place where we're not particularly happy with the behaviors that we're creating. We can also undo that, or we can reteach our brain to do something different. But there is repetition and learning over time. It's something we need to commit to do by utilizing our why, by utilizing something really, really personal to us, something really intrinsic, something that's tied to positive emotional attractors, and give ourselves that commitment to repeat something over time. Creating new patterns and habits can require effort to begin with. Yeah, but specific conscious tricks can use the power of the brain to move you closer to healthier habits. So the systems two thinking, the breaking out of automatic thought, put the behavior in a time-based scenario, whether that's positive or maladaptive behavior. That's going to be a really good way to get yourself out of automatic thought. But really, I could just keep banging on about finding the thing that is really intrinsically motivating for you. I think is the best way to create any habit, and understanding that there is a challenge at the beginning stages, and it's not purely down to the individual. It's not purely that we're lazy or failures or anything like that. Is you are literally using so much energy to change the pathway of your brain to something it's so used to doing, to something that it is not used to doing. It's possible through neuroplasticity, but it does involve a degree of commitment to yourself and to whatever it might be, and really, really sink into what are you going to gain out of this instead of what are you going to lose. Bread, sad bread. But really focusing on, what are you going to gain? More energy, more autonomy, more freedom away from specific trappings of ill health. And really, really focusing on those is going to help to make those changes a lot easier to implement. Right, apologies now. I think I've run slightly over time. Brilliant. So thank you so much for tuning in this lovely evening, and I will see you guys soon. I think Andrew is back next week on Thursday evenings, and have a lovely weekend. Bye.